Today we're going to look at section 1-1, which includes key features of functions. Specifically, we're going to look at domain and range today. Sometimes we will identify domain using set builder notation and sometimes using interval notation. So for this example, we're going to look at it using both notations. So when we have a function and we're identifying the domain represents all possible inputs of the function. And so if we think about values in terms of a problem, that means we're looking for x values of a function. And then alternatively, range represents all the possible outputs, which means that we're talking about the y values. And so we will start today just to kind of practice graphing quadratics and absolute values, because that's what we've been doing prior to this lesson. So if we look at example 1, we actually have to graph the function x squared minus 3 so that we can draw our graph. And so to do that, what we want to identify within our expression is what is a, what is h, what is k. And so looking at the function, the coefficient on x squared is 1, so that means our a value is 1. There are no parentheses, so remember the way that this works is that it's a times x minus h squared plus k. And so when there's no parentheses, that means that our h value is 0. And then k is the number being added or subtracted after the squared. And so that means our k value is -3 for this problem. So what we want to do is to be able to graph the vertex. And so using these values, the vertex of our graph is at 0, -3. And so that's going to be our starting point. On our y-axis, since it's a quadratic, that means we're going to graph using the pattern out 1, up 1, and then out 1, up 3. So using the odd number pattern to create our graph. So if we are identifying the domain of the function, what we're looking at is what are all the possible x values from left to right. So if I'm looking at the left, if my graph is continuous on the left, that means that it's approaching -infinity. If my graph is continuous on the right, that means it's approaching infinity. For most functions that you will graph, the domain is going to be all real numbers, meaning I can keep my pattern of out 1, up 3, to out 1, up 5, to out 1, up 7, to out 1, up all the way to as long as I want to do it. And so what that means is that all the values that I can think of work in this function, so I don't have anything undefined. So that means that the domain of this function is all real numbers which I can write in 2 different ways. So if I want to write this as a set, the way that I'm going to write this is that it's the set of all x such that x is a real number. Okay, so remember those braces, identify that we're talking about a set. If instead I wanted to write this answer as an interval, I'm representing from -infinity to +infinity. Okay, so domain represents all possible x values. In this case, it can be anything. And so that's how we note that. For range, what we're looking at is all the possible y values. So we look at it from the minimum value to the maximum value and want to write range that way. So if we look at this graph, Remember, with y values, negative infinity is anything, if I have it pointing down, positive infinity is when it keeps going for increasing in the upwards direction. And so if I look at this, I can see that I have a parabola with a minimum value that equals -3. Notice that's my k. Okay, so this function, because it's pointing upwards, has a minimum value of -3. If I want to write that in set builder notation, so I can see that it keeps increasing in the upwards direction and has no maximum, that means that range is going to be the set of all y such that y is greater than or equal to -3. Okay, so it starts at -3, and then the graph keeps going forever in the upward direction. So it's any number greater than, but also equal to -3. If I want to write that same statement in interval notation, that means that I'm going to go from my minimum value to my maximum. So since I said it was equal to -3, I'm going to start with a bracket in my interval notation. So it goes from -3 to positive infinity. And remember, infinities always have parentheses because they aren't attainable.